Thank you. I'm Don Smith. A year and a half ago, retired from the city of Folsom. For 20 years, I was the water conservation coordinator. We helped people with irrigation, with water problems, that type of thing. Before I came to Folsom, I was an independent landscape contractor. I ran a business and we took care of large properties, apartment complexes, condo developments. We maintained irrigation as well as taking care of the lawns and the shrubs. And there are simple things that people just aren't aware of. We're going to talk a little bit about how to water. We're going to talk about controllers. We're going to talk about drip systems, better equipment, better sprinkler heads that are more efficient, and some simple repair items that would help you. And we're going to cram as much as we can into an hour. Now, the first question when someone finds out what I do for a living is, how long do I water? That's not a simple question. There's different things that go on that affect how long you water. So I thought I need to come up with a good answer for that question. So my answer is just long enough, okay? Because how long, people are fixated on that. You know, you can read books, you can read articles, there will be probably little stories on the news in spring, you know, little features about landscape, and they'll say, well, in Sacramento, you need to water 15 minutes every other day, or they'll give you some formula. And when they do that, they're really just showing their ignorance, because it depends. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on exactly where you are, your location in the area, what kind of soil do you have, what kind of sprinklers do you have. If someone just rips off an answer, it's usually wrong. And they're thinking most of the time, when you see one of those things where they tell you how long, it really is a function of how many inches you're applying to your turf. So how many people here know in 5 minutes how many inches of water have you applied to your turf? Who knows that? I'm not going to tell you. You can figure it out. It's complicated, and it really, when I've tried to explain that to people, I see their eyes start to glaze over, you know, and it just, for a homeowner, that really is going deeper than you need to know. So what is enough? You know, how long is irrelevant. You need to think of your lawn like a potted plant. You know, when do you stop watering a potted plant? When it runs over, when the saucer fills up. Then you know, I've watered enough. You need to think of your lawn in the same way. Now, you don't have a saucer underneath it, but you can see when it starts to run off to the gutter. And when it runs off to the gutter, that's enough. Now, you might be thinking, this is Sacramento, and in a very short time, it's going to be very hot. And water runs off to the gutter in about 3 minutes. And my lawn's going to die if I stop watering at that time. Well, I'm going to address that in a little bit, how to handle that situation to get enough water on. So the better question is, how well do I water? And you can see on this is, anybody recognize that? Fair Oaks Park, coming into the entryway. And you'll notice all of that. That is not watered very well. Everything that runs off into the gutter, into the street, is just waste. As a matter of fact, the biggest source of water pollution in an area like Sacramento is runoff from lawns. Because it hits the road, it hits the gutter, it picks up whatever automotive chemical is in there, any fertilizer that runs off, it picks that up and takes it right to our creeks, which dump into the American River. So you want to avoid that as much as you can. So ask yourself some questions about your lawn before you turn the sprinklers on. Is it dry and hard? Well, then you probably need a little bit of water. Is it saturated and mushy that you don't need to water? You know, do I gutter flood when I water? Is my system in good working order? A lot of people don't know. They never look at their system running. They may have it set to run at 4 o'clock in the morning. They're not up to see it. And I'm sure we all appreciate that knock on the door from your neighbor who's walking a dog and said, hey, you've got water running down the gutter, you know. When I was in Folsom, that was my job. But I live in Rancho Cordova, and I don't like getting punched in the nose, so I avoid, you know, knocking on people's door to tell them stuff like that. So, you know, a lot of things we think about, what can we do? How can we make this better? And being good American consumers, our first thought is, well, I'm going to go buy some stuff, and that will make it better. So you have to be careful with that, though. Because just buying more stuff, if you don't have a system in good working order, yeah, it's not going to help you. We're going to talk a little bit about controllers and what's called smart controllers. Well, the smart controller just assumes that you're taking care of your sprinkler system. And if you have this stuff going on, it's going to waste more water than if you were just running it by hand. You know, because it's thinking everything's working well. And it may not be. This is one of my pet peeves. Where is your controller mounted? It should be somewhere, a garage, any place the wiring comes to, that's right here. You know, when I was a contractor, I worked for a guy. He was probably a gentleman in his 80s at the time. And it was in Arden Park, and he had a really nice property with a detached garage. And he'd had multiple contractors come over to take care of a wiring problem between his valves and his controller. And what he ended up with was a bird's nest of wiring that didn't work. So, you know, I was the next guy on the list to be called. So he went to show me the problem, and I said, well, show me where your timer is. And we walked in through the man door of the garage, and he pointed up. And the timer was up above the man door. And that, my thought was, I'm thinking of this 80-year-old man climbing on a ladder just to adjust his timer. And I asked him, why did they put it up there? And he goes, that's where they ran out of wire. So they just put it there. So put it where you can easily get to, because you're not going to make the adjustments and changes that need to be done on a regular basis if it's hard to get to. So mount it where it's easy. Now this is important. I find a lot of people never do this, but you need to, several times a year, at the very minimum, before the irrigation season starts. So, and I'm hoping that when we're not in the irrigation season, you're turning your sprinklers off. Does everyone do that? Okay. And if I understand if you don't want to raise your hand. But we had that, I found that a lot. We had a complaint at Folsom one time in one of the newer neighborhoods. It was about 5 years old, not that new. And there was a complaint that one homeowner was watering like 5 times a day, every day, all year round. So we went over to talk to him to see what the problem was. And the homeowner said, well, you know, the contractor put it in, and he said it when he put it in. And I just assumed he knew what he was doing. You know, and we had to explain to him, well, he knew what he was doing to establish a brand new landscape. But you're way past that now. So let's cut back a little bit. But you need to spend some time to evaluate, to turn the system on, to watch it while it runs. And you'll find things you didn't know. Things happen. You know, a lawnmower wheel can go over a sprinkler and turn it so that it's not spraying the lawn anymore. You know, we had one gentleman in Folsom. We went to do a water audit. Citrus Heights does water audits. Who's had that done? Oh, do it. Take advantage of that. Because everything, it's called a water audit. Or we call them water-wise house calls. And you'll get someone who knows what they're talking about, will come out to your house, actually look at your system and give you advice on things you can improve, how you should schedule. It's a very valuable program. So anyway, doing one of those one time, I asked the guy, I said, well, do you have any problem areas, anything? And he pointed to this big dry brown spot right next to his driveway. And he said, no matter what I do, I can't get this greened up. And it was just dry and hard and dead. And I said, well, what have you tried? And he goes, well, I turned the water up, the time. I went, okay, and did that work? And he goes, no. I said, what did you do then? I turned it up some more. And the way his lawn went, it went from his driveway and sloped down a little bit. And down at the bottom of that slope, looked like there could have been alligators living there. It was high grass and weeds and very mushy because everything was running that way. And I said, well, let's turn the system on and see what it looks like. And then he got a look in his face that was like, you know, it's like when I called an electrician over to look at my refrigerator and he asked me where my fuse box was. Okay, so that was $75 to go. Well, he kind of had the same look, you know, and it so happened that the sprinkler head that covered the dead area had been twisted around and was spraying his driveway. And his response was, I wondered why my car was always water spotted. And so we corrected that, and that was an easy correction, just turn it back around. So look for things like that. If you see dry areas, look and see and make sure that the coverage is what it's supposed to be. Make sure nothing's broken, you know, and there'll be subtle hints to things broken, like mud will be washing over the sidewalk, or you may see an area around a sprinkler head that's being washed out, and you've got a hole, but you know, sometimes it's not apparent and you've got to watch it run. And you've also got to be really careful with drip systems that you watch them. You take a look every now and then to make sure they're doing what you think they should do. Because the landscaper's joke is, when do you know a drip system's not working? When the plants die, you know. So turn the drip system on and go around and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. And maintain, you know, that's part of maintenance, just looking at it to see what it's doing. Do that on a semi-regular basis and manage it right. Make sure you're scheduling correctly. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. That you're not overwatering, that you're watering correctly for that part of your landscape. You know, it's real common for people to look at their timer and set everything for 10 minutes, you know, once a day or once every other day. Well, that's not always appropriate for every part of your landscape. You know, you may have a drip system that needs to run for an hour, maybe once a week. Lawn sprinklers need to run 3 or 4 times a week. So you need to understand your system and make sure you're managing it well. All right, so let's talk about controllers a little bit. There are 2 types. One, I call them traditional, and then they're weather-based controllers. The traditional controller is the one you go and you program in when you want it to run, how long you want it to run, and you put all that in there. And then you're also going to have to go back and make adjustments seasonally. The same thing that works in April is not going to be enough for July. And July is too much for April. So you have to make those seasonal changes. We're going to talk a little bit about the functions, things you should look for if you want to use a traditional controller. Do we have any master gardeners in the room? Very good. Folsom helped the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center install a weather-based controller that would automatically adjust itself. And I had numerous master gardeners complaining to me that it did not work right. And when I mentioned that to the guy that was in charge of the master gardeners, he said, well, yeah, they won't keep their hands off it, you know? So there's a little bit of an inverse thing to how well a weather-based controller works, depending on how knowledgeable in horticulture the user is. And as good as weather-based controllers are, sometimes a master gardener is going to know better about water needs than the automation, even though the automation is very good and gets you very close. So you might want to consider that if you like to have your hands on and making changes, go for the traditional controller. And then there are weather-based controllers. These are ones that will adjust themselves according to the weather. And my rule of thumb, the cheaper a controller it is, the harder it is to program, because you have less and less functions, and we'll talk about functions in a minute. And the functions will help you be efficient. So the cheaper you find one, usually you have to be careful because they left some stuff off, or there's less of some things in it. That's why it's cheap. These are two examples of traditional controllers that I happen to like. There are other ones out there. These aren't the only ones that are good, but there's one called the Irrigation Rain Dial and the Hunter XC. And they're very simple to program. What I look for, I actually sold a lot of this when I was a contractor because I could easily explain to people how to program it. Everything you need is right there on this dial. You know, the days you want it to water, the time you want it to water, the times you want it to start. It's all right there. And it's very, very easy to understand. And similarly with this one, the Hunter model. These are good traditional controllers, and that's what you want to look for. Is it easy to program? Does what it's asking you to do make sense? You know, some things are, yeah, hit this button, stand on one leg, and put your tongue to the left side of your mouth, then turn that dial, and maybe we'll make it work. These are both considered electronic. There used to be one on the market, and I think you could find them if you still look hard enough. But there was a dial that you put little pins in, and it would turn around, and it would, does anyone still have one of those? Oh, if you do, get rid of it. It's a mess. I hated it when I was a contractor because I would show up, and parts would be missing. The little pins that you stick in to set the time or the day to water would be missing. And it's pretty limited in its functionality. So, you know, at least upgrade. These things are online. Not that I want to shortcut the irrigation suppliers because they're very good. And I'll even put in a little pitch for the irrigation suppliers that, you know, if you know exactly what you're wanting for, go to the big box store. They'll have it in stock, and if you understand what you want, that's great. If you're not quite understanding what you want and you go to the big box store, you may be talking to the kid that works in appliances. And he doesn't want to look foolish, so he's just going to make stuff up and sell you something. But if you go to an irrigation supply store, it'll cost you a little more than the big box stores. But you'll be talking to someone who knows the material and knows how it works. So you have much less of a chance of buying something you don't need if you tell them, this is what I'm trying to do. You know, they'll usually steer you in the right direction. But anyway, these are traditional controllers. And this, I've actually seen this used as an irrigation controller. And this is a controller for lighting. It tells it when to turn on and when to turn off, and that's about it. But I've come upon these used as irrigation controllers. Now, when you're looking at a traditional controller, the first three things, the most important three things, is to look for one with multiple programs. Do you understand what a program is? You'll look at your timer, it'll say program A, B, C. If you've got a really good one, it may go as far as D, E, F. And what a program is, each one of those programs is like a controller within the controller. I've seen a lot of people use it and they think that's how you schedule multiple start times. So if you want your lawn to come on 2 times, you start it on A and then you go to program B and you start it again. That's not what you do. You use the program to divide up your system by watering needs. The lawn is going to need, it's the thirstiest, it's going to need the most water. Your drip system is going to be totally different. It needs to run separately. Your lawn, you may run it multiple times, 4 days a week. The drip system may only need to run once a week, but it may need to run for an hour, you know, so that it soaks in, because it's watering very slowly at the base of the plant. So you want to make sure that you have multiple programs so you can divide that system up and run the different zones the way they need to be run. Start times, once again, the more start times it gives you in a 24-hour window, the more efficient you can be. If you have to run it so long you're gutter flooding, you can divide that runtime up into smaller pieces and have multiple start times. Typically, you're going to get 3 start times on a traditional timer. If you spend a little more money, you may get 5 or 6. So, and then stations or zones or valves, those words are almost interchangeable, but how many valves can you hook up to the timer? You know, if you have 8 valves in your irrigation system, don't buy a timer with 6 stations, because you'll only be able to run 6 valves. Or you'll have to double up, and you may not have the pressure to do that. So make sure that the timer will meet the needs of your landscape. And don't do that one. So more desirable functions. How often do you run? You will have calendar options. Some will be on a weekly calendar, and some will give you what's called an interval watering. Weekly, if you set a weekly calendar for watering, you'll be setting the specific day of the week that you want your system to water. So it'll be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever. If you use interval, sometimes it's called skip a day, but you can set sometimes between 1 day to 14 days. It depends on your system. But you can set how many days you want between each watering. Now it won't always come on the same day of the week. If you put it like every 3 days, it won't always be, you know, and a lot of people, you either do your yard work on a specific day, or you have a service that comes on a specific day and mows your lawn, and you want the lawn to be dry when you do that. Now, I'll tell the husbands out there, I put my lawn on interval so that every now and then on Saturday I could tell my wife, lawn's wet, I can't mow. You know, I got to go fishing. I'll mow it later. But then it doesn't always work, because my wife is smarter than me, and she knew what I did. So those are 2 options you should have. Now, cycle and soak, that's a method of watering that you can use when you have multiple start times. And like I mentioned before, when you're watering your lawn, one of the things that's very important when you're doing your evaluation is to start with a dry lawn, turn your system on, and then time how long it takes before you're going to the gutter, before you're running off to the gutter. Whatever that time is, that's the longest you should ever run it. So for many times in Folsom, we had this wonderful soil we called rocky clay. And it was tough to water. And then everything was on a slope, you know. And so things would run off pretty quickly. So it was like 3 minutes for a lot of times. And then the objection people had was, if I only run it 3 minutes, it'll be dead, you know, in August. So cycle and soak is a method you can use. The more start times you have, the better it works. But what you do your test, and you find out how long you can run without runoff into the gutter. That may be 5 minutes. Well, in August, 5 minutes of water is not very much. So what you do is maybe you need 15 minutes a session. So you break it up into 3 sessions of 5 minutes using the different start times for that zone. And you leave about an hour to an hour and a half in between each watering session. So what happens is you water, it will saturate, you know, as far as it will. And then that's when you start having runoff, that 5-minute mark, whatever it is. And it'll be different for everybody's lawn. So you end it there, you wait an hour and a half or an hour, and you do it again. And then that water, instead of running off, soaks in on top, because the earlier session has started to soak in already, and there's room for water to come in at the top. And this is especially important if you brought a new home where they've scraped the soil and then run heavy equipment back and forth across your landscape so that it's nice and compact. And then they come in with about a teaspoon of compost or soil to put over that. So that makes it even harder, because it doesn't soak very well into that hard stuff, but it will saturate that little bit of compost they put in before they rolled out their sod. So cycle and soak is even more important if you have that situation. But that will allow you to get the water in deeper. And the deeper the water goes, the deeper your roots will grow. You know, roots are like teenagers. If you feed them too much, they never go away. You know, and if you water too much on a lawn, the roots will never go deep. They'll go as deep as they have to. And so if you're always saturating the top, That's as deep as they go. And if we get to the point of another drought, and there will be another drought, this is California. The cycle of drought and rain has gone on for eons and will continue to go on. So we'll be in a drought. And then Citrus Heights Water District, not caring at all about you, will tell you you can only water 2 days a week. I'm just kidding. But they'll have to do that because state regulations will say you got to do something about it. And landscape water is the biggest water use in our communities. But if we get to that point and you've got a nice deep root zone, your lawn is going to survive. You know, where I live, I get water from the Sacramento County Water Agency. And we went down to 1 day a week a few years ago. And my lawn suffered. It definitely looked stressed. But when the restrictions were lifted and I could go back to 3 times or 4 times a week, it came right back. And it looked good. So that's very important. Timed rain delay. If you know there's rain, a lot of timers will give you an option. You can press the rain shutoff and you can give it a time. You can say, don't water for 3 days. And then, you know, when the rain's passed, it comes back on. Start time stacking. This is a mistake a lot of people make. You look at all those zones and you start programming time, and then you're using multiple start times. So you may have, you've programmed 3 or 4 zones that all together will run for a half an hour. But then you didn't give it time to start the next session. So they kind of overlapped. Now, a good timer will realize that I'm overlapping and it will just hold off on the second session until the first session's done. A cheap timer will just not water the second session. Or it will try to water everything at the same time, and that could affect your water pressure and you may not get enough. So when you're doing those times, pay attention to your start times and how long you're running, because the start times are per program. So if you've got 4 stations on the program, pay attention to how long each one of those is running and make sure you don't overlap. But if you have one that has start time stacking, they'll take care of that for you. Remote control. A lot of systems now will give you a remote control. If you get a weather-based timer, especially the Wi-Fi timers that we're going to talk about, you get a remote control and you can walk around the yard and start and stop things. I mean, if you don't do that, then you have the fun of starting a system, making a little repair, running back to the garage, turning it on, running back to where you were before. But if you get one with a remote control, that's taken care of. Are they upgradable? Some systems will allow you to add more stations. The stations are, there'll be a module that you plug in that will give you 2 zones. And you can add more. And seasonal percentage adjustments. This is what I used when I was talking to a Folsom homeowner and I'm trying to explain all this to them, and I just see them glaze over. I would quickly go to the seasonal percentage adjustment. That is a dial, so you could figure in August, this is how much I need to water. And I don't ever want to change it. So what you can do is go to your seasonal percentage adjustment, and you can change, you can drop it by 50%, or you can increase it by 50%. That way you're not messing with the times, you're not messing with anything else, you're just changing how long things run. That's not the preferred method. You know, the preferred method is to change start times or how often it runs. But if you're stuck, that's a good, easy way to do it. Weather-based irrigation controllers. There's different kinds, and they work on this formula. So remember that, and if you have one, you need to write it down. So how do they, well, they work on estimating that function. And that is a formula for what's called evapotranspiration. Who's heard of that? Good, a few people. Yeah, Jace better have heard of it. That is a measurement of how much water is lost due to evaporation and transpiration, which is water used by the plant. So there actually is a calculation that determines that. And that the state has a system of weather stations that calculate this. Now, originally this was developed for agricultural uses. You know, it's not quite, for a farmer, he's got to look at every cost. And he doesn't want to water more than he has to. For a homeowner, it's just good practice. So what these weather-based timers do is, you know, I keep saying timer, and I have scolded employees who use timer for an irrigation controller. It's not a timer, it's a controller. So if I say timer again, you can correct me, but it's easy to do. So what they do inside the timer, they have this formula or some version of it, and then when you install it, you will start, the first time you program it, it will take you through a series for each zone or each valve, and it will ask you a series of questions. It will ask you how shady it is, just for that zone. So let's say you're starting out and it's your front lawn. So you will tell it, is it shady? Is it full sun, partial sun? What kind of sprinklers do you have? Do you have the big rainbirds that go ch-ch-ch, or do you have the misting heads? You know, and you'll put that in there. And then it will ask you, what kind of soil do you have? I always thought it would happen every now and then in Folsom. Someone would say, I put that in there and it didn't work. And then we'll go through the programming, and I'll find in the question of soils, they put sandy loam. I thought, no, we have rocky clay, not sandy loam. So you got to correct that. So it takes site or zone-specific data combined with this formula, and it estimates how much water you need. And then it will run your system accordingly. And there are two ways to do that. Some of the systems, up here is I believe this is a rainbird. This is a weather sensor, and it's wired back to the timer. So that's where the timer's getting its weather data. It's getting the data straight from that sensor, straight from your house. Now you'll notice that this is up on the eaves. I found them on the fence. And another time someone told me it didn't work well. The water comes on for a minute and it stops. Well, what was happening, the sprinklers were hitting the sensor, and the sensor thought it was raining, so it turned off the system. So you have to put it up where it gets data from the atmosphere in a good spot that's not going to get wet unless it's raining. And then you have the Wi-Fi models. This is the Orbit Beehive. This is the model that Citrus Heights has a program for, where they'll come out and install it for you. I think, do you pay for the whole thing? Yeah. It can't be beat, you know. If I turned in an application with a Citrus Heights address, will you come to my house in Rancho Cordova? Oh, okay. Anyway, and that's a deal you can't beat. Folsom had a similar thing with a different model, but the Wi-Fi models, not really that hard to program, but they'll program them when they install them. And it leads you through a series of questions and just guides you through everything you need to do to program it. And then there's some cool functions, like you can walk around with your cell phone as your remote control. And it will allow you, when you say, okay, zone 1 is my front yard, you can take a picture with your smartphone of your front yard, and then when you ask for zone 1, your front yard, a picture of your front yard comes up. And you can turn it on and off, and you can do your inspection. It makes it very easy. And I think these are the wave of the future. I mean, we've just recently, through state ordinance, forced contractors and builders to put in weather-based controller with its own weather station. And I'm really hoping that the next time someone thinks about this, they move to these Wi-Fi units, because they're great. All you have to do, if you can connect to your Wi-Fi, they work. and you download an application, and that lets you do it. My son and daughter-in-law live in Idaho, and I installed one for them. And every now and then they'll call me with a question, and I've got the app for their thing on my phone, so I can look at it. You know, they have it too. My daughter-in-law is very mechanical, and she usually figures things out long before my son does. But so I know when I have a question from her, it's a real question. But I can open the app on my phone here in Sacramento, California, to see what's going on in Idaho. And it's very neat. You can, if you have a contractor who is knowledgeable about the Wi-Fi controllers, you can give him access to the application. You know, it works great. I loved it. When someone would call with an emergency, I could easily look at the timer and see what's going on. There's the information about the direct install program. Talk to Jace, he'll set you up. Now I'm quickly gonna go through some equipment because we're gonna run out of time here in a minute. These are just some add-on devices. These are rain sensors that you can put on a traditional controller. And when they get wet, they'll make sure your controller doesn't turn on. It's just that simple. This one is wireless, and this one wires back into the timer. Soil moisture sensors. Now, people that are really, really anal about their landscape will combine one of these with a weather-based controller, whether it's Wi-Fi or has a sensor. And the Wi-Fi and the sensor, they're looking at atmospheric conditions. These are looking at soil moisture. So if the atmosphere says you need water, but the soil sensor says there's too much water in the soil, it won't go. It'll wait until it dries out. If you're going to go to drip systems, you need to do a little math to make sure you don't overload your drip system. Okay, and for all of you who ever said, why do I need algebra? Well, today. So this is how you test your flow rate from your system. You know, this is going to be online, so you can go back and look it up. But you take a 5-gallon bucket, you fill it up, and you see how long it takes. So for our thing, we have 135 seconds for 5 gallons. Then you do, through the magic of algebra, you convert it to gallons per hour. And in this example, you would come up to 133 gallons per hour, GPH. And every emitter will either do half a gallon an hour, a gallon an hour. So on that drip system, you would never want to go more water than that. Or else out at the end of your system, there'll be no water in it. Retrofit devices. If you're going to change a system to drip, typically if a system's designed from the start to be a drip system, it'll look like this. That's a filter and that's a pressure reducer. If you're converting a system that's spray, like say you turned your lawn into a shrub bed and you want to go to drip. So it may be a little much to do the plumbing work to change your valve to do that. So what you can do, Rainbird came up with this, it's called a retrofit kit, and it looks like a sprinkler head, but inside of it is a filter and a pressure reducer. So you replace the sprinkler head, you can use this instead of this, and you connect your drip system up here. There's a 1/2-inch male threads, and there are fittings that will take you from the regular sprinklers to the drip system. And it saves a whole lot of work if you don't want to put this in.
You're talking about just the filter on the one on the left. You're not talking about the valves. This doesn't replace the valve, does it?
No, the valve, you'll still have the valve there. If it was a lawn spray system, you won't have this. It'll just be a straight pipe. And that's what this replaces. The valve is still there. Different other things you can do, they have these multiple port outlets where you use a 1/4-inch tubing. 1/4-inch tubing is not my favorite because it's easily damaged and moved from where it needs to be. But if there are uses for it. If you have like a cluster of bushes a long ways from anything else, you can just run a pipe or connect to a pipe and put in one of these and run the tubing to each plant. and do your thing. This is my absolute favorite, inline emitter pipe. This is it. And you will see the little fat spot? That's an emitter. It's encased in the tubing. You don't need to poke a hole. It's just already there. And you buy it in 50 feet, 100 feet lengths, and you spread it out where you're going to water, and it takes care of everything. My whole yard is that.
So this is a drip system.
This is part of a drip system. Okay. This is half-inch tubing with emitters. The normal emitter, you have to poke a hole and put an emitter in. Now, when you're planting shrubs, when those shrubs mature, that root zone is everywhere. That little emitter by the base of the plant is not doing much. So what this will do, you'll set it up, and I'll show you some examples, where it will cover an entire area, an entire root zone. And it works very well. You don't have, I had a dog that loved to rip up the 1/4-inch tubing. And another kind, depending on where you live, you may have critters that like to gnaw on it. And that's just great stuff. And that's what it looks like. That's what's inside the pipe. And it comes in 12 inches apart, 18 inches apart, 24 inches apart. The 12 inches apart is the most common, and you'll find that almost anywhere. Other stuff, you may have to order it if you want wider. And it's a measured amount, either half a gallon an hour or a gallon an hour.
So that would replace your soakers.
What's that?
That would replace your soakers.
Yes, and better than the soaker.
That would be faster, right?
Not faster. Did you say faster?
Faster.
No. But you let it run longer and it soaks in deeper without the runoff. This is my backyard. And you'll see this is the inline emitter tubing. The black pipe is a manifold. It's just black pipe like this. There's no holes in it. It's just meant to connect the different runs. And on this one, a mistake people make is they'll go back to the valve where your filter and drip system is, and they will run this tubing all the way out to the zone they're watering. Don't do that. If you're starting from scratch, run PVC underground until you get here. And on this particular one, you know how I told you to calculate your flow rate? Well, on my system, I have more emitters than I have room in my flow rate. But what I did, I cheated. I ran 3/4-inch PVC pipe underground, and it connects to this manifold, and then it comes up in the middle, and there's another one that goes across. It connects there, and it goes all the way to the end and connects there, and the PVC is underground. Those multiple points of connection allow you to cheat a little bit on how many emitters you can have. That's just another example. Don't pay attention to the circle. That's me being anal. There was a tree there, and it was right where the pipe was going, so I did a circle. I could have just as easily gone right by it, and it still would have watered. Another example, I have a separate zone for my trees. You'll see the circle here. That runs all by itself, just to do the trees. You can see how wet this is. This was about an hour, running for an hour, and it soaked the ground pretty well. This is it a little bit later. You put the bark over the emitters, over the pipe, and this was the second season. And that's how well everything grew in and how well it works. And that's about 10 years ago. It's still working. Different kind, I'm going to rush through this really quickly. Different kinds of equipment you can use. This is a pop-up sprinkler that actually works on drip. It's a 1/4-inch tubing, connects down here, plugs into your black pipe, and then if you have like a ground cover or something that you want to cover, you can use that. High efficiency sprinklers. This is called a rotary nozzle, and it replaces the spray nozzle in a sprinkler like this. So the nozzle part this part here comes off, and you replace it with What did I do with them? Oh, here we go. A rotary nozzle. And what that does, and also too, another tip. Anyone ever worked on sprinklers and had trouble keeping this up?
Yes.
This is called a Rainbird pop-up tool. I think you can find them at Home Depot. Plug it in. It saves a lot of frustration. But anyway, the rotary nozzle, instead of sending out a spray, it sends out streams that slowly rotate. And they're full circle, half circle, adjustable. The one I like the best is made by Hunter. It's called MP Rotator. And they're very good. I've got them in my yard. And what they are, they're lower flow. You have to run them longer than you would run your misting heads. But you'll get more water going right to where you want it, and less wind drift and evaporation, and they're just more efficient. And there are other kinds of spray heads. The Rainbird U series, you can see how the spray goes up and then goes down. A sprinkler head's efficiency is judged by how evenly the water is distributed underneath its pattern. And that's what this is designed to do. The Toro Precision Spray, there is a membrane in here that fluctuates. So when you see the water come out, you see this. And what that does is make sure the water is evenly distributed under the spray. If you have the old impact heads, this type, change them to this type. It's called a gear-driven rotor. Less maintenance. You know, every year I used to have to go in and clear out Bermuda grass that wrapped itself around these things. This won't happen. It's less damaged. Its spray looks like that, and it's very even, and it's a good replacement. Also, too, people aren't aware of the different patterns you can buy. If you have a rectangular section that's not very wide, you can buy a nozzle that's made to go maybe 5 feet out and 15 feet long ways. So you can do a rectangular one without wasting water. And they do the same thing for center strips, for squares, end strips, and corner strips. If you've got a downhill slope and water drains out of the bottom sprinklers, there are sprinklers intended to take care of that. There's a little check valve in the bottom, and when the pressure is turned off, it closes. So the water doesn't continue to drain out after the system stops. Flex tubing, this is really good for repairs. I've got some samples up here. It looks like drip irrigation, but it's thicker walled, and you use barbed fittings. You see the threads will screw into the sprinkler head, and then you can barb it in. That's very good if you have a system and the pipe is too shallow. You know, and you want to put a new sprinkler head in, but you're that much above ground. You can dig a bigger hole, use that flex tubing, put the barbed fitting in, bend it back around and put it down lower. And that way you're not cutting pipe to make, you know, ridiculous plumbing things to make it work. Valves. If you look at this valve, you see a series of screws on the top. That's this one. You see all these screws. Now inside of here is a diaphragm, and this is usually what goes bad. If you have a valve like this, don't bother taking the screws out and going to get a diaphragm. Take it out and put a new valve on. But this is called a jar top valve, and there's several manufacturers. Instead of the screws, it just unscrews. And you unscrew it all, take it off, put the new diaphragm in, and screw it right back in. Works great. And when I did repairs, I loved those. You know, and people always look at me funny when they had those, and I said, you need to replace it. And they say, you can't fix it? I said, yeah, but labor cost is going to be more than the valve itself. So just let me replace it. So that's just a hint of what I liked. If you're starting over, if you're replacing something, look for the jar top valve. And you'll see it because it doesn't have the screws. Easy repair things, there's two. There's the flex pipe. It's just a length of flexible pipe with a coupling on each end that you can glue back in. So you can cut the damaged piece out and easily work that back in. Because without that, what did you do? You had two pieces of pipe come together, you had one coupling, and you tried to do that to get it in, and you never get it in correctly. And if you've got that cheap thin wall pipe, chances are you're going to crack it somewhere doing all of that, so you can do one of these. The other one is called a slip fix, and what this does, it trombones. You see it go in and out. So if you had a damaged piece of pipe, you would cut it to this length. You put a coupling on the end, put this part in, and then expand it to fit to the other end of the pipe. That way you're not doing all that bending and forcing. And just an example of how you put it in, you cut it to length, the full extended length. You put a coupling on one side, you glue that part, and you put it in, and then just expand it to fit the coupling. Glue, I like these two, especially if you're doing repairs. They're very forgiving for dirt and water, because usually the first thing the directions say, fittings need to be clean and dry. Have you ever dug a hole and tried to work on pipe? It's very difficult to be clean and dry. But these two brands are very forgiving, especially the Red Hot Blue glue, I like that, and the Wetter Dry is also pretty good. My favorite little wrench thing there, it's called a Rainbird pop-up tool, and some people will call it the pup tool. And that's it. Do we have time for a few questions? Or?
Yeah, definitely. We had some contractors do some work on our sprinklers, and they used two different glues. Like one, I think it was blue, and then they painted it with something else, and then they put them together.
Oh, no, what that is primer. It's a purple primer, and the glue may have been blue. The primer just cleans it really well. And that's the way to do it if it's brand new construction, things are dry and clean like they're supposed to be. The primer stuff, some contractors will disagree with each other. I used to always use the primer on pipe that would be constantly under pressure. So like the supply valve from your water system to your first sprinkler valve, I would always use the primer. Now, going downstream from that, your pressure is not as high. So if I had the Red Hot Blue glue, I wouldn't always use primer on that part of it. I didn't think it was necessary. But then you have contractors that will disagree, and some will put primer on everything. And it's not wrong. I just don't think it's necessary. Yes, ma'am.
The controller that they come out to install the Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
will that work on several different controllers? I have 3 different controllers.
Well, I'd have to look at the system. You have 3 different controllers. You may need 3 different Wi-Fi controllers. But if there's a way to wire them all together, I recommend that. But
No, I have a half an acre, and half of them are on the very back and half are on the front.
So you would probably need a control to replace each controller. And you got to make sure that you're getting Wi-Fi out where you're.
Controller is. And you were talking about controllers. Do they have Wi-Fi controllers that you wouldn't have to wire your valves directly to the controller?
No, you still have to get current from the controller to the valve.
Let's invent that.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. The Wi-Fi is getting the internet to the controller. So you get the weather data and all that, and you can use the app to access it, the controller.
The 2 valves that you have, 2 different types up there.
Yeah.
I have the one that is the older style.
Mm-hmm.
The little screw that's on there, I manually turn on my valve with that.
Oh, to manually turn the valve on?
If I'm trying to test something, I
Yeah.
can manually, so I don't have to go into the other side of the house to
Right.
try it. Does that hurt anything to do that?
No.
Now, how do you do that with the other type
Well,
of valve?
it depends on the manufacturer. She's talking about a pressure release, which is this thing. See this little black? You can twist this up and a little bit of water will come out, but it's supposed to, because the diaphragms work on pressure. When the pressure is higher on top, it closes the valve. And what this does is relieve the pressure on top so it opens, and then the system will run. You can also do it on this one. I don't know if you see it, there's a little lever. this cylinder is a solenoid, and this little lever, electrically, this will start the valve and let it run. And you can turn this little knob here, and that will let the water run too, without using that. Like I said, don't buy cheap stuff. Even though this is a good jar top valve, it's cheap stuff. But it has the pressure release knob that you can use to start it. And some are different. Some will have, like that one, where you can turn the solenoid and it will, but I always tell people, you can open a valve just by turning the solenoid a little bit. But be careful, because if you turn it too far, it's gonna go and you'll have a nice little fountain. And the same thing with the pressure release valve. As soon as you see water seeping out from it, stop. Because that always, water pressure will shoot it off, and then I dare you to find it.
Do you have recommendations for someone to come in and look at your irrigation and possibly redo it?
I would first start with your water district.
Okay.
Do a water audit. And the reasons for that is they're not coming to make money.
Okay.
They're coming to provide a service to you.
Okay.
So I found a lot of times when I worked at Folsom that contractors would come in and recommend things, and sometimes they weren't necessary. So we would do the water audit, and then the homeowner would have a really good idea of what the problems were, how their system worked. So when the contractor shows up later, you can tell pretty quickly if he's trying to upsell or that kind of thing. Yes?
Can you ever have a soaker and an emitter on the same station?
Say that one more time.
You have little fountain emitters,
Right,
right? And we have soakers.
right.
Can you run those on the same station, or how can I?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. And you might not have a choice, but I wouldn't. And that's one thing I didn't really touch on. But when you look at a sprinkler zone, it should all be the same kind of equipment. You know, so if you've got spray heads, it should be all spray heads. If you put in the gear-driven rotor, it should all be gear-driven rotor. If you put in a drip system, it should all be drip, and that's really important. Because a drip system is low flow, doing gallons per hour, as where sprinkler heads are doing gallons per minute. And you just can't schedule it to satisfy each one.
Because we're flooding and dry. You can't balance it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so
you. That's good.
So you should always do that. And when I showed you that, the retrofit kit, the thing that replaces a sprinkler head and allows you to have the filter and pressure reducer, if you are using that, say you've got a lawn area you replaced, well, cap everything else off, you know, or maybe put two and run the pipe from one to the other with whatever you got to do in the middle. But don't try to have spray heads and drip systems coming on at the same time.
All right.
All right?
We'll cut it off.